Nowadays, most central vac systems installed use the same types of wall inlets, and the hoses are the same size, same form factor, just as the tubing and fittings are sized to be universal among central vac systems. And I think it's partly because the wall inlets are made by the manufacturers of the tubing and fittings, for the most part, that this standard size has existed. And I'd like to go through the pros and cons and the differences between the various types of wall inlets you might encounter in a standard modern central vacuum. Starting with the most common one, this is the round door inlet, also called the beam type inlet, the toilet door inlet. This particular example is made by Plastiflex, and functionally it's very good. The main objection to this is aesthetics. It's kind of an ugly thing to have on your wall. Plastiflex inlets from about 10 years ago had a big issue with their seals. They used I think neoprene peel and stick seal, and over time this would get all gooey and leak, and the valve door would actually get glued to the body of the inlet, and it was just terrible. But they have fixed that, and this is now a nice heavy rubber seal affixed with a plastic washer, and this I guess this is sort of a heat, it kind of forms a rivet out of the plastic. This is a plastic post that sticks up through, and then it's a heated instrument presses down and mushrooms out that plastic. And this is very effective because it's actually melted down there. This washer is not going to pop off, and that'll be a very durable design. These are normally installed with the contacts at the top for resistance to dirt and corrosion from moisture, and that is preferable, even though it does place the hinge at the bottom. So if the spring on the hinge ever goes out, then this door is going to be flapped open all the time. But more commonly than the spring failing on these, what happens over time as these get brittle is the door itself breaks off. And then of course you have to replace the inlet valve. So generally this is functionally pretty good, just aesthetically somewhat objectionable. The heavy recess around here does a nice job of holding the hose in position if you have a hose with a switch on it. This is an end from a non-electric hose, but it has a tab on it. I always thought it was curious that Plastiflex is now putting tabs on the wall end of their non-electric hose. It's completely unnecessary. This could be plugged in any position. But if you plug this in far enough that the tab goes into this recess, then the hose is held very solidly there, which is a good thing. So this one's made by Plastiflex. Originally they were made by Beam, and here's a Beam inlet. This is probably 30 years old, and they made a version that said Beam on it and a version that didn't. Either way, the doors do tend to break off. This plastic seems to get brittle more easily than the Plastiflex. This might be ABS and this might be PVC. Doesn't say. But you'll notice also on this one, the low voltage wires, rather than being screw terminals, they are pigtailed into a wire lead, and you would just use a wire nut to connect to the low voltage wires. The benefit of this is that not only can you fit as many wires as you want in here with just the proper size wire nut, unlike a screw terminal, you also have no risk of some careless painter or carpenter loosening up your screw, removing it all the way, then the spring pops out, and then the inlet is no good. Beam also made a version of this inlet in metal. And still do. In fact, that's they don't make plastic ones anymore at all. They've farmed that out to Plastiflex, but they do still make the metal ones, and these are very nice. The contacts are on top, the hinge is on the bottom, but these have an issue with the hinge pin popping out because the metal, I think this is zinc, housing is just crimped around that pin, and the crimp kind of breaks off over time, and then the hinge pin pops out. And if you're a cheapskate like I am, you can take JB Weld, mix it up, and you can fix that, and this will work again. But one thing you do have to be very careful about with these is even though you have those pigtails here, they're not crimped around the insulation. They don't have a strain relief of any kind. They're just crimped around the conductors. And so it only takes a few extra bends back and forth when you're installing this or whatever. If one of these wires breaks off, the inlet is junk. After this, a company in Canada called Hayden developed two competing types of inlets. This is the Hayden full door inlet, and this is the Hayden square door inlet. This one was made for sale with an Electrolux system, and I think that's pretty cool, the name on there. The square door inlet made an attempt to be aesthetically a little more pleasing, and really the big reason they developed it was to use it with their super valve technology that incorporated the 120 volt power right into the inlet, and that was a total game changer technology wise. But they made a version in the non-electric style, or the low voltage style. It was to be installed like this, which places not only the hinge at the bottom where the spring can break and then the door is open all the time, but it also places the contacts at the bottom, which is less than ideal. But of course, for a direct connect inlet, if you want the plug at the top, you have no choice. On these, the plastic itself, whatever material it is, there was a problem with the screw posts breaking out at the top and bottom if you over tightened, and that was an issue. Also, this gasket on every Hayden inlet was secured with a little push fit fastener, and the problem is that over time these can pop off, and then your gasket is going to get sucked into the system, and you'll have a vacuum leak, but you can't really tell from looking at it because this will look exactly the same. It's only when somebody's using an inlet somewhere else in the house that you'll have a big leak at this inlet because the seal is missing. The Hayden full door inlet originally did not come with locator tabs for the hose, and so there was nothing preventing the hose from turning in the inlet. And so this is really only good for use with a non-electric hose, or the super valve version of the full face inlet. In later years, about 10 years ago, they started putting the locator tabs on there, and that made this a pretty good inlet. However, you still have, first of all, if you mount this with the hinge at the bottom, the profile on top is nice and clean. But if you mount it upside down, well, now the contacts are on top, as preferable. Now the spring and the hinge is on top, as preferable. But now you get to look at this on your wall, so that's not ideal at all. The full door inlet is superior in terms of longevity because the door can open all the way up to the wall, so there's no risk of breaking it off, as there is with the square door or round door style, where if you force this a little too far, something will break. But these used a pretty weak spring. You can see that's a pretty teeny little spring in there compared to the kind on the round door inlet. It's funny, they made the door bigger, but they made the spring smaller, and so this sort of has a kind of a loose feel to it. Not very positive, it's just kind of a little lazy. So I used these for a time, but then I got away from them. Plastiflex, that also makes this one, makes their own take on a full door inlet. On this one, if you place the hinge at the top, then the contacts are on the bottom. And if you place the contacts on the top, then the hinge is on the bottom. And the spring on this one is also a little weak, and I've seen these with broken springs and they get the slack jaw effect. This one also opens 180 degrees, so there's no risk of breaking the hinge, but the spring can sometimes break. The nice thing about this one is they give you a nice deep section to retain the hose end. And that is, well, of course, on this one, the hose end tab is just there for looks. It's not actually big enough to engage that. It's not going to do anything. But that's a superior setup. And I'm thinking of going to these and just trying them out because they seem like such a nicely made product. What I use for the most part nowadays is the vacuum valve style. First of all, I service at least as many systems as I install, and when you need to replace an inlet, the vacuum valve is just slightly larger than most other inlets. And what that'll do for you is the new inlet will cover the paint line of the old inlet. You never want to put in an inlet that's smaller. You want to use one that's just slightly larger, and this one fits the bill quite well. You can install it with the hinge at the top, and that doesn't look bad, or you can install it with the hinge at the bottom, and that also doesn't look bad. But if you put it with the hinge at the bottom, then the contacts are on the bottom, and the door is resting on the hose instead of... No, the hose is resting on the door this way, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather the door rested on the hose. And then if the spring breaks, then the door will still close. The only time I've ever seen these with broken springs was in a hair salon, or actually a barber shop, where they really get used constantly. Normally the failure mode for these is that, again, this little press fit fastener comes off and then the gasket gets sucked in. That's my only complaint about these. And what I don't understand is the older version, here's one from 25 years ago, used that heat and press method, and these gaskets never come off because this is literally melted into place. And I don't know why they changed. This one has 2 sets of hose alignment tabs there, but because they're just teeny little tabs, it is not hard for the hose to twist. If it just comes ever so slightly out, then it'll come out of place anyway, and it'll twist around and you lose your low voltage contact. But they need to be that shallow because the door doesn't have room for anything deeper than that. The only other slight complication with these inlets is because the fit between the door and the body of the valve is tight for appearance sake. If you crank on this thing until the whole valve is bowed in, if you really tighten it down, then this won't close and open freely, and you'll have this this sound whenever the system turns off because these doors are open slightly. So that's the only thing, is they feel weak, but they're really not. They're very durable because this door can't really break off. You'd have to really try hard to break this off. So overall, I like these despite their couple little minor issues, which I wish they would address. In the last few years, Cyclovac has brought out their Decovac style of inlet. This is a universal fit wall inlet. It's got the hose alignment tabs. It has a nice gasket on there. Doesn't open quite to 180 degrees, but I think it opens far enough that it won't break itself off. And ideally, this would be installed with the contacts and the hinge at the top, though it can be installed the other way, like that. However, see how the screw holes are at, what would that be, 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock? No, 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock. That means that you cannot use it to replace an inlet with a Hayden-style mounting bracket in the wall that only has the top and bottom screws. You either buy Cyclovac's mounting bracket for new construction or for new installations of any kind, or you use this with a Plastiflex or Vaculine bracket, or you use it on one of the really old systems where you have a flange 90-degree fitting in the wall, and then the metal plate which is screwed to the flange fitting is not used at all. You screw directly into the flange, and that'll work. But the other slight complication with these is occasionally you'll see, because there are no top and bottom screw holes, this is slightly shorter than a modern conventional inlet, and it won't cover the paint line. So it's a very nice inlet, but I can't use it for every application, so I have to stock something else. So this is not my go-to inlet generally for that reason.